Level 989.
Welcome to a 989 on Health Extra. These quick supplements should help ease any withdrawal symptoms you may experience while waiting for our next full episode. So, Mike, what's on today's agenda?
Today we're going to do an off-the-cuff chat about a quick topic. Warning, we have not spent the hours and hours of research that most episodes require. This is just two dudes talking. Good morning, Mr. Brandon.
And good morning, Mike.
So, I've been to your medical school. It's nice, it's a modern building, it looks clinical, medical, well-kept. But when a person tells you they're going to a school for herbalism and needleism, you kind of picture a lot of old wood and carved runes and halls filled with incense smoke and teachers in saffron robes. I mean, look, I'm really ignorant of reality. I learned everything I know from TV. So you were a student there to achieve your current degree. How would you describe being a student there compared to the degree you got from the University of Florida?
If I'm being honest, it really wasn't that much different. The class sizes were smaller at the medical school than they were at UF, but that's no surprise. For a local school of any type, it's going to be easier to keep the classroom numbers down. But otherwise, I guess school is school, so you're required to meet certain requirements for your grades, you're required to read certain books, you have to do some level of memorization, and at the end there's always a test that in essence is just how much of this do you remember and can you regurgitate until you're gone, and then, well, you were tested and it's okay. So in that aspect, I'd say, honestly, it's not that much different. You had more amenities available at UF, but again, bigger school, more money. But in terms of quality of education or differences, like you said, the runes and the witch doctory, not so much. When you think of medical school, whether it's Chinese medicine or Western medicine, you can picture, drab white rooms lit by fluorescence with a group of students sitting there with their laptops open and their books open, bent over in concentration, and probably most of them frustrated and exhausted. It's going to look about the same.
Now you're a teacher at that same school. So I want to know what classes you've taught and what you're about to teach.
Well, the first class they had me teach was a lab supplemental, which basically amounted to me being a last-minute stopgap measure to help the students prepare for their clinical entrance exams. When they reach the 5th semester, students prepare themselves to actually go into the clinic and basically become interns, where they'll be trying to get their own patients and treat patients and actually start applying some of the things they've learned. In that 5th semester interim, where they're having to get ready to take that entrance exam, which is a mixture of book learning and a written test, as well as an oral test and some actual practice where the physicians have to watch and see that they can needle correctly and know at least basic locations of points and how not to basically kill their patients. There is a lot of nerve-wracking time spent by the students themselves hoping and praying that they've learned enough. And so rather than having the students just at a loss and having to do little more than just complain, the school decided to hold a supplemental course to help refresh all of the skills they should already have, as well as answer any burning questions that may have been missed in the education process up to then. And so basically I was just getting all of the students ready to take their clinic entrance exam so they can treat their patients.
One thing I never knew, especially growing up, was that if I did poorly as a student, that reflected badly on the teacher and on the school. So motivated even just from their own protection to make sure you did well. Any teaching the next generation to be great aside.
I don't think I really had a firm grasp on that either. It has been astonishing for me to realize that I feel kind of a personal sense of responsibility for every one of my patients and students, but specifically we're talking about my students, of course. Mm-hmm. So when they come to me for the class, I actually do feel a burden of responsibility to make sure that I'm getting them the information they really need to be able to succeed and pass, whether it's a test or whether it's their clinic entrance exam or whether it's being able to treat their patients. It became my responsibility to help them and to realize that that's how it is for every teacher. especially at some of the bigger institutions, it would be easy to become overwhelmed and bogged down because your job is dependent on a certain number of your students passing and doing well. And if you're not giving them the foundation they need, well, it's not hard to replace you. Off you go. That would be pretty terrifying. And is pretty terrifying.
So you've got a class coming up, I think it's organic chemistry?
Biochemistry. Just basic biochemistry.
Oh, just basic biochemistry. Anyone can teach that.
Well, I don't know that anyone could teach it, but it is just Biochemistry 101, which, if I'm being honest, is kind of a class that's designed to prep all of the incoming students, people who are hoping to become either, biologists or medical practitioners, you name it. It's basically a class in which you can prep them for all of the terrifying information that is bound to come. It's a foundation to make them aware that not only are they going to have to learn how to treat a patient, they're going to have to understand some of the basic processes that drive all life. And there's so much complexity that biochemistry is basically just a class to help you understand how much more complex things get when you're trying to understand how basic chemical and molecular structure plays into a biological life form.
And when does that class start?
I believe it is the middle of June. I don't know the exact date, but I have it on my calendar.
Okay, you've got a couple of months then.
I do.
So I imagine as a teacher, you just walk in on the first day, crack open the book, and you're ready, right? There's nothing to do, nothing to prep. How hard can it be? I'm sure the tests come from the textbook company, right?
I wish. How I wish. In fact, one of the most standard biochemistry books out there does indeed offer some of those services. So you get pre-made quizzes, you get a test bank of questions that you can put together, you get automatic grading, you get projects and things that you can give to the students. They've been around long enough that they've created their own full class for the people using that book. Unfortunately, at least in terms of what I need to get across to my students, the book itself is a little too complicated. Not that they couldn't grasp it, but that for the level of understanding they need, it is far too advanced. I would be giving them information that they would basically have no choice but to throw out the next semester. So as much as I'd like to use that book, because I think it does a great job really covering the basics of biochemistry, it's not feasible.
So you need to write Biochemistry for Acupuncture, the textbook by Brendan Weintraub.
Essentially, I really should, and if teaching this particular class goes well and it's something that they're going to have me teach ongoing, I may very well do that. As it stands, there is a book, I think it's called Biomedicine for Acupuncturists, and it covers some of the same topics, but not well enough.
Could you, put the book together and it's it's on Amazon Books, download it for $200?
Why, it's funny that you mentioned that.
The money's in the textbook.
Because, yes, in fact...
and I require this book.
This book is required, which is a power I have. And in fact, that's what a fair number of college professors do, is eventually they'll write their own book and they'll say, yes, you must have this book for my class. I wrote it. It is $250 because it's a textbook. And what are you going to do? So it's an option. I'd prefer to make it and, sell it for a reasonable price. Writing a book, regardless of its level of complexity, it's an undertaking of a fair amount of time and effort and energy, and it's not something that I will be getting to right away.
I imagine just putting your materials together for the semester, you've already at least outlined it, the book.
That's what I've kind of been doing, and I have my work cut out for me. I've outlined what I want to teach. I've written up the syllabus, so at least the students will have a good idea of the goals of the class and what they should be able to do when we're finished. And now I'm to the point where I really need to put all of the hard work into creating these individual class units so that when they walk in, I'm prepared. I'm not working from a blank sheet. I'm not going to be surprised by what we have to get through. And that's where I'm at now, and I'm not spending an adequate amount of time yet getting that together. It still feels so far away that I think I'm kind of putting it off as more work comes in and as new patients come up. I'm trying to put the focus there instead, but it's getting to the point where soon I'll be putting forth the hours and hours and hours required to get a class together. And it's part of why I've always, I don't want to say always, because as a kid you don't understand some of this, but I have for a very long time understood how poorly paid teachers actually are. They put in a ton of hours outside of the classroom. That's just their personal time. And it's just expected. They have no choice. If you want to have an interesting class, if you want to be able to keep up with modern standards, you have to put in hours of work, grading and adjusting your class schedule and making sure that your students understand what's going on. And no one gets paid for that. It's just the hours that you're physically at the school, that's what you're getting paid for. And it is woefully inadequate for a majority of the teachers, unless they're doing research, in which case they're getting grants. But again, that's extra time that they need to be spending outside of teaching that it would be nice if it weren't necessary. We're expecting these teachers to be basically responsible for raising our children, and they're not getting paid for that.
Seems like another one of those things that it's not about the pay. It has to be a calling, which is unfortunate because it should pay well. Now, how has being a teacher changed your perspective as you look back on your time there as a student?
Fortunately enough, it actually hasn't. I, as a student, understood that there are limitations to what a teacher can do, how much time a teacher is given, how much a student can actually absorb in a given period of time. So there were always problems, mostly at the administrative level, at the school when I was there. There were, miscommunications, there were promises made that weren't kept. There were, problems with certain teachers that either didn't seem to be doing their job well enough, or there were some troubles, more in terms of interpersonal stuff than anything else. But that doesn't reflect on the school itself so much as it does. It's just the nature of having a bunch of people basically seeing each other every day.
Yeah, office politics and interactions. And
it's no different than any other office I've been in. It's no different than any other job I've ever seen. So it's not like a school just magically becomes this perfect, harmonious place where it's a joy of learning and it's safe and marvelous and wonderful, just dome of perfection. And so coming back as a professor, I think I benefit from having been a student not too long ago. So I really still have a fresh memory of what the students are going through in terms of frustrations and stressors. And I also can come from it from my angle, which is knowing what they need to know in terms of their board exams and in terms of practicing as a physician. So I can kind of meet the students with a little bit more efficiency than some of the teachers who may have been there longer, who don't necessarily have quite as much an understanding, especially immediately, of what the student's life is really like.
It's kind of hard with chemistry because carbon is what it is and oxygen is what it is. But like in English literature, you may have more ability to say, this is how you should understand it, and this is what you need to know, and this is what you need to understand, and forget this and forget that. But chemistry is mostly math, right?
Chemistry is mostly math. But again, we're coming at this from a pretty significantly different angle than most people who are learning chemistry. When you talk about medicine for most Western medical practitioners, regardless of what they're going through, so they're heading through the pre-med program, they're learning chemistry in terms of just that, of Western chemistry. So all of the things that they need to learn are based on the mathematics and the models that are developed and followed throughout the entirety of their educational career. With Chinese medicine, we're essentially trying to teach our students two completely different modalities, two completely different methods of thinking that don't necessarily sync up quite as well. So while chemistry, at least from a purely Western standpoint, is mostly math, when we're starting to talk about biochemistry, which is how that chemistry affects the body, Chinese medicine looks at it very differently than Western medicine does. So there is no way to teach pure chemistry and have the students understand how an herbal medicine is working on the body. I mean, there may be, but in terms of the education we're provided, it doesn't work that way. We don't have a full, complete chemical understanding of how a particular herb affects each individual patient. Not from a Western standpoint. From an Eastern standpoint, we look at a completely different set of terms and arguably have a more complete idea of the outcome of the herbs. But it doesn't mean we can describe to you chemically exactly how it's accomplishing those goals.
You're talking about stuff like heat and moisture and...
Exactly. That's more or less a good way to look at it. And it's one of the biggest challenges that's presented to a modern acupuncturist is that the translation of these terms and even an interaction of some of these terms isn't necessarily useful. There isn't necessarily a way for me to tell you, well, you're going to take this herb and it's going to nourish your yin. And then someone says, well, what does that mean physiologically? Well, sometimes I can give you an answer, and other times, honestly, I can't. And there's no way for me to teach it because that connection doesn't exist.
There's no formula for that, right?
Correct. There's no way for you to create that standard mathematical model and say, this is what you would want me to say. This is how you would understand it. And as a result, that's kind of why acupuncture physicians and kind of some of the complementary physicians that are out there, they're almost looked down upon because we work outside of the system that the Western practitioners are used to. We're seen as clearly outside and clearly inferior since we can't describe things in the terms that they've come to know and understand as really the only true, deeply honest terms that are out there. I came across a story not long ago that kind of described the situation really well to me. And it was basically 4 blind people are given a different part of an elephant to touch, and they're asked to describe what an elephant is. And so one of them has the trunk, and one of them has the tail, and one of them has the leg, and each of them are clearly going to give different descriptors of what the elephant actually looks like. But it's only when you actually take a step back that you can see the complete picture. And in essence, that's what any physician is doing. Whatever their specialty may be, they're taking that part of the elephant and having a good understanding of it. But unless you take a step back and kind of combine all the information together, you don't get a full image of what is actually happening. And so Eastern medicine may have completely different descriptors than what Western medicine has, but it's all part of the same whole. And in the end, as long as the function and the outcome is what is desired, it doesn't necessarily matter how those descriptors got to that end result.
That's interesting. I can kind of picture chemistry is so abstract. I never really liked it. I liked mixing things together. Ooh, it foamed over. Or, oh, it turned black. To see the more dynamic reactions, that was always fun. But just the math of it was so dull. Or oxygen has free electrons and shares them with, if you could phrase it in more of a, oxygen is very friendly. Oxygen is a giver. And, iron is very hungry. He's needy. And, they get together and now we have rust or something. To personify it a little bit more, I'm not trying to make it sound like you're teaching chemistry to kids, but with the Eastern approach to, like I said, like heat and cold and wet and etc. It's not wet. What's the word for it?
Yin is usually what's describing fluids. Yin is considered more of like the fluids, and yang is more of like a motive force, the actual metabolism and energy required for the body to do anything.
Yeah. So if you broke down the elements in an approach like that, I think it'd be a lot easier for people to understand. Not just I'm teaching Eastern medicine, but just I'm teaching chemistry. That probably should be more of how it's taught, at least in the beginning.
I think that to a certain degree, that's the way it's intended. When I was in my bachelor's program, I took the honors level courses that were required for chemistry, and you can tell that the general goal is to help start that basic level understanding. But being too friendly, too nice about any topic almost makes it seem unimportant. And so it could be almost detrimental to some students who would take something and say, this is too easy. Obviously, I don't need to pay attention to this. It's basic. It's standard. So it's a risk. And you've really got to know, as a professor, how basic to make your class. And that's where I'm at right now, is I'm having to pull back from some of the more hardcore mathematical things I'd like to teach about chemistry and realize that the information they need is much more basic, at least for now. There may come a time when Western medicine and Eastern medicine are a little bit better attuned to each other, and they're going to be required to have a better understanding of how an herb actually works in the body or precisely what mechanism they're interrupting. But until then, my goal is to make sure there's just enough of an understanding that they won't prescribe something that's completely inappropriate, and to make sure they understand the basics well enough that when they get to pharmacology, when they get to a later class that covers another more medically relevant in terms of a Western aspect, when they get to that point where they need that information, they'll have the foundation that they can build upon and get more complex.
I think you're going to be an excellent teacher. I've heard you helping people with problems for many, many hours over the phone when we work together. And you're patient even when you shouldn't be, even when you can't be. Like, how can you be patient right now? That person's a jerk. Or this problem's really big and complex. And you just break it up and take your time. And if it needs to take 3 hours, it takes 3 hours. So I think your students are really lucky. I think you're going to do a great job.
You're far too kind. My biggest concern, if I'm being entirely honest, is that most biochemistry courses end up having something like 30 lectures minimum. I'm being given about half a semester, which it's not like it's a 2-hour a day, 3 days a week class. It is a 1 day a week for 2 hours course.
So it's like a very compressed summer college course.
It's exactly what it is. So I'm being asked to cover one of the potentially most complicated and wide-spanning topics of both chemistry and biology, and to do it in an amount of time that is probably easily half what most biochemistry classes would be given.
And if you screw it up now, everything they learn in future semesters is going to be affected.
Yes, and that's the point, is that my job is to build the foundation, and I still don't know now exactly how well I'm going to be able to compress all of the information they need into such a short period of time.
I'm afraid to say, I guess it comes down to, can they do the math? Like, if they don't understand how the formulas work,
will they be able to complete?
Yeah, I mean, you can memorize this reacts with that and gives you this, but when they're like, okay, do the formula, and you can't.
I'm fortunate in that, at least at the level they're coming to me, they're not really expected to do a lot of the balancing equations themselves. Simply being able to know some of the basic biological processes, understanding at least the basics of this breaks down into this via this cycle and it produces this.
Even photosynthesis is incredibly complicated.
It is. And fortunately, like I said, they don't have to be able to solve the chemical equations themselves. Simply being aware of the critical steps is what they need to be able to do.
That helps.
Yes. So it makes my job easier in that I'm not teaching them chemistry. I'm not teaching them biology. I'm basically kind of teaching them how those two areas of science interact. And that means that I get to avoid some of the trickier topics, like forcing them to balance chemical equations and to understand exactly what molecules bond with what and how much energy is created and what the products are. That's almost a completely separate class that would usually be taught in chemistry rather than biochemistry. For which I am thankful, because if I had to try to teach them actual chemistry at the same time, I'd be up a creek. It's just not feasible.
Now, I would like to make a silly suggestion for your first day, the first biochemistry class.
Hit me.
You've got these tongs, and you've got this is the leaf of the Rosacea yakudoka plant, and this is the blah blah. And you touch them together, and it's like, poof, big bright green flame explodes, and wow.
This is what happens if you do things wrong.
Right, if you know your stuff, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, this guy's got it going on. I mean, there's nothing like fire in a chemistry class to get attention.
I may have to follow through with that.
And never again, probably. But they won't know. They'll be waiting. Oh, he's going to bring out them tongs again. Maybe today.
What's going to happen?
I better show up for class.
What's going to be next? What are we going to learn? All right, I'm going to have to look into that.
I don't know. I'm sure there's something somewhere. Is there anything else that I should have asked but did not?
Let me see here.
I know you don't like talking about yourself, but I think people will find this interesting.
They may not. I'm glad to shed some light on the process of becoming an acupuncturist / teacher / whatever else.
Book writer / librarian.
That's a tough one. I'm not sure. And I think there were a few questions that I started rambling on and lost the train of, what the initial question actually was.
Oh, no, you did well. On that note, I think we should wrap it up.
All right, let's wrap it up.
Well, I thank you very much for chatting with us today, and have a great day.
All right, and you do the same.
That's all for now. You can find links to read more about today's topics at level989.com. Why not take a moment to rate or review us in iTunes, or give us a mention on social media? We can't help everyone if they don't know we exist. Don't rely on us as an alternative to medical advice from a professional healthcare provider. For the full disclaimer, please see our website. Thanks for listening, and now, go health yourself.